In this video, we're going to talk about traveling with your kids in a disaster. So I've already got a video out there that is traveling with babies in a disaster. And you can check these videos out as well and see if there's anything good in there. But, most of my videos are, I think there's good tips in there. But this one is specifically to traveling with kids in a disaster. So I'm going to break this up into parts because there's just too much information to get into that is really important that people need to hear. So anyway, this will be part one. So part one is planning and prep. So I teach a course called Urban Survival for Christians. And forgive me if you've already heard this a dozen times already at this point. But in these modules that I kind of teach to people, it's kind of interesting because obviously I teach have a plan. Well, the only real plans out there that mean anything are ones that you've actually prepared for. And what's kind of interesting is how many people that will take my course and literally never put together a proper plan. And even if they do scratch out some kind of a plan, they will never actually prepare for that plan. So if you're one of those people out there that has this mindset of, hey, if a disaster was to kick off or something was to happen, like, we're going to do this, this, and this, have you ever actually did anything in preparation for that? I'm telling you, if you're traveling with kids, there is so much to cover that you need to have a plan and you need to prepare for it. So the very first thing I'm really going to talk about here, because I need to kind of get it out of the way, is if you have to travel with your child, you want to have documentation. Documentation is a big deal. I've been in places where people were literally trying to take children that weren't their own, and thank the Lord they got stopped because they didn't have documentation for those kids. So if you were traveling with your kids in a disaster type situation, it might seem inconvenient to you. It might even bother you because you're already worked up. It's a high stress situation and you're all worked up and you're like, why are these people stopping us and asking if these are kids? Of course they're our kids. Let me ask you this. How do they know? How do they know it's your children? I'm telling you, disasters bring out dark people. They bring out dark things, bad people. Evil things happen in disasters because bad people take advantage of those situations. So don't be upset if somebody stops you and asks you to identify that these are indeed your children, because you would literally be the first person that if somebody did abduct your children and we're traveling with your children, you'd be the first person wondering, how are they getting so far? Why is no one making sure that these actually are their children? You would want that. As a parent, I want that. If some disaster was to take place, I want somebody in authority checking that the people that are traveling with children, that the children are supposed to be with them. Maybe they're not even their own children. And that's part of your plan. That's part of what you should be putting together is, what other options do you have? Do you work 30 miles away from where the kid's school is? And then you get this, this tsunami warning or, forest fire warning. The wind just changed. There are things that I've talked about in past videos. We get an earthquake, which is absolutely sudden. But now all of a sudden people are panicking. The earthquake has done serious infrastructure damage. And they're advising get the kids out of the area. Fires are breaking out. Things are going crazy. Have you had a conversation with your school? What happens in a disaster? Like, where are you taking my kids? Where are you going? These are all parts of your plan. You don't want to have this plan where you've overlooked so many different things. And then whenever some disaster would take place, then like a weather-related disaster, which a lot of those times, these things happen really quickly and a lot of times without warning. We just had this major flooding in Texas, the Guadalupe River. Those people literally had no warning. They went to bed camping, on vacation, like life is good. And literally in the middle of the night, people were getting swept away. So for some people that even with whatever little warning that they got, like that's just chaos. Like they're just moving. So you're going to plan for the worst case scenario. That's a really, really important part. When you are putting your plan together, it has to be the worst case scenario. Because anything that will happen then, hopefully it's less than the worst case that you've planned for, which means that you're covered. Whatever your plan encompasses, it's covering a lesser case scenario. And then you're hoping and praying that it is a lesser case scenario, a significantly lesser case scenario. But a bad case scenario for a parent is that you get separated from your kids. That's worse and beyond, you know. You want to try to put some kind of plans in place for that. Maybe a family member is able to pick your kids up first. You know, maybe from a safety perspective, you know, you've done a threat assessment, and the threat is so great that you're literally reaching out to a neighbor to go get your kids. So you want to have a backpack that stays with your kids that has documentations that if they have to travel, so that people can get in contact with you. So you've got all kinds of information. You want to have pictures on your phones. You know, if there's a potential possibility that maybe your neighbors are one of the safety people in your safety circle that you would contact. Maybe it's your parents, you know, the grandparents of the kids. You know, it could be a school teacher. You know, it could be a person at church. Whomever it is, what I would recommend is that those people have pictures with your kids on their phone with you in it. What I would recommend is you hold up your driver's license so that they can ID you. So they know, okay, well, this is the parents of the kids. This is the birth certificate. You have a copy with the birth certificate in the documentation for the kids. And it's like, okay, these names on these driver's licenses match the names that are on the birth certificate. The address on the birth certificate matches the driver's license. I don't know, maybe you've moved. So you just make a notation of that. Traveling with your children is unbelievably vital and important. And I'm telling you, when I was at the border of Romania, when these two men were stopped and they were traveling with Ukrainian kids, thank the Lord they got stopped. You know, what you can't even imagine what two men are going to try to do to these children, or where they're going to take them. So in a disaster, things can get pretty crazy. So having a plan is very important. My whole thing is don't live in fear. And I'm sorry, I'm a parent speaking to other parents. I've been in situations where things were terrible, and that bad men were taking advantage of the situation. I'm not trying to promote fear. And I know what I'm talking about is a fearful topic. There is no other fearful topic for a parent than getting separated from your child in a dangerous situation. I've felt that, where I just, for a minute, you know, my son, you know, crawls under a bed and falls asleep, and he doesn't answer to our calls, and that panic sets in. I have 4 kids. I've felt it. I know what that distress feels like. So what I'm saying is that in a situation, the worst case scenario is that maybe you could get separated from your children. Plan for that. Maybe even talk to your kids about it. Try to offset their stress. Make sure that you have other things that I'm going to talk about in these videos. Either send the videos to them, just let them watch them themselves, or have a conversation with them. Whatever you do, you need to start putting these thoughts into practice. And here's the thing, having a plan, it actually, for me, it really relieves so much of that anxiety that I might have around that situation. Because I'm like, hey, this is a good plan. I've put a lot of thought into it. You know, this will work. You know, going to start talking to my kids about it. So, documentation, thoughts about where you're going to go, who you might bring into your circle, maybe even having other families with other kids, and planning, hey, if we can't meet up before we leave, then we're going to have a rendezvous point. And the agreement is we'll wait there for a day or two if it's safe. So a threat assessment is huge. Conducting threat assessments, talking to these other parents potentially, or the other people that you're going to travel with, how to conduct a proper threat assessment. And trust your instincts. You know, for a lot of people who don't have a background in security or anything like this, trust your instincts. If your discernment is telling you, I don't feel safe here, trust it and keep moving. But what you can't do is you can't allow fear to take over, because the fear will mess with your ability to discern a situation, to have situational awareness. If you're given into that fear, every option is going to see bad. And that won't be the case. You're going to find that in some situations, there are good options. In every situation, there are good options. And that could mean is there's options that better than other options. That's a good option. That's the one you want to take. So putting some plans together, having an identity bracelet, having an identity necklace, having some information that travels with your children that can identify who you are, that if you're ever to get separated, maybe your phone number's on there. Maybe the phones don't work, but hey, you know what? At some point, maybe they're going to come back on again. You just want to plan. Lots of people in disaster are separating from their children. When all those floods happened in the early 2000s, lots of people were reunited back with their children again. There's disasters that happen all over the world that people are initially separated from their kids that get reunited again. Because what's kind of cool is even though there is a lot of bad people out there, there is more good people out there. So you want to have the ability to be reunited if you were ever to be separated. This is a big part of your plan. Okay, so planning and preparation. Your plan means nothing if you haven't prepared for it. Going to end this first video here and hopefully let people absorb that, and then we'll pick back spit that out. We'll pick right up again in the second video. Thank you.